Man, just great stories. It's funny. I just had a mutual friend on the show. The reason why I actually called you to check up on you was Bernie Nelson. He's just been on the show,
Lord,
and
yes.
so I told Bernie. I said, when I get Tony on here, we're gonna talk about you and the escapades of Bernie and Tony back in the day. Now, Bernie told me a
Some of
story.
it I can't. Some of it I can't talk
No,
about
of
now,
course
Chris.
not. He said the same thing as well.
I'm
But
joking.
one of the stories Bernie told me was that he was in the room the first time that Garth Brooks heard the dance. And since we are going to include the dance in this episode, I know people out there, we're almost an hour into this, are going, when are you going to get to the dance? When are you going to get to the dance?
No.
But Bernie was in the room when Garth heard that song for the first time. Tell us about that.
Well, what I remember most about it was the fact that the people who played that night or that afternoon, it was an early show at the Bluebird. The people who played were not only the performers, they were the audience. I mean, there was nobody there. I mean, there was hardly anybody there. And so I know Garth played, I played, Liz Hingber played, who wrote a bunch of stuff for Reba McEntire. She was the waitress there at the Bluebird at the time, and Mark Irwin, who
Who's going to be on the show soon, hopefully. I've been in
oh, good,
contact with
good,
Mark, yeah.
absolutely, yeah. Well, and he was the bartender. So it's, who knows? It was just back in those days, like I told you, Chris, it was like you just looked for anywhere you could get in front of a microphone and sing a song you'd written and hope somebody was listening. Because you never know in this town who is listening. So, but yeah, I mean, we back in those days, me and Bernie and a fellow by the name of Scott Miller and uh, a guy a wonderful harmonica player by the name of Jelly Roll Johnson.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, we would hold court anywhere that would have us, and most often we were at Douglas Corner. We had a thing called the Fiasco
Yep.
that we did every
Fiasco 4 is what Bernie called it, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and it was utter irreverence. I mean, we had nobody to offend because nobody knew who we were. So it wasn't like you had to be on your P's and Q's and don't say anything bad about this person or that person because that person didn't even know you were alive. So it was a real free form. But back in those days, everybody was writing a ton and couldn't wait to get in front of people and play. And so it was, as I said, it was so irreverent that people would show up. We had a boxing match. We built a ring in the middle of Douglas Corner and literally did it like a title fight. We did a mock of
I
the
bet you
Ralph
Heineken
Emmys.
Zero wasn't part of all that back in the day,
No,
right?
no, Don. No, they were full strength back in those days. Yes, absolutely. But yeah, I mean, but it was a great learning experience because what it did was say, all right, you ain't got no hits to play,
Mm-hmm.
so just play some good songs because you're playing them for your friends, you're playing them for your peers. So it was a real education back in those days.
And
It
so
truly
Garth
was.
heard the song and essentially said to you, if I ever get a deal, I'm recording that song.
He did, and and I think here's the real irony behind this, all of it, Chris, is the fact that you move here with one goal in mind, and that's, gosh, what if somebody will record one of my songs? That's what everybody's dream is. From the day that Garth first heard that at the Bluebird early show to the time he stood on that same stage and sang a showcase for Capitol Records was 3 years.
Wow.
I mean, 3 years in between. So in that period of time, uh, you know, everybody passed on the song. Everybody turned it down. So who could have ever thought that the greatest thing that could ever happen to you as a songwriter would be to be turned down by everybody? But that's exactly my case. I mean, that song wound up with the person who got it from the very first time they heard it and made it their song. And, the cast of players made it a record. The brilliant production of Alan Reynolds, the video production that accompanied it. I mean, a lot of things fell into place, but they only fell into place because the person who sang it really believed in it that much from the very first time they heard it. and and thankfully, when he called me when he got signed and said, "Is that song still available?" I was able to say yes, because
No.
nobody else wanted to do
It's
it.
so funny. I don't want to divert from this incredible story, but I just talked to Steve Dorff not too long ago, who's famous
Yeah.
for a lot of different things. But he wrote the song "I Cross My Heart." Wrote that song, and every time he tried to fit an artist into that song, he would get the same thing. Nice song, Steve, but not one of your best. And so many people said that to him. And then the marriage between artist and song comes along, just like this one with your story, and boom, we have just these global iconic songs. Just because the right thing happened at the right time, call it kismet, call it fate, whatever you want to call it. That marriage is so important, like we talked about earlier, and this is a great example of that again.
Oh, absolutely. And I came from an era where, you know, that's exactly what happened, Chris, is that I don't know that, but for, you know, Dionne Warwick, I mean, she was the voice of all those Backrack David songs.
Yep.
I mean, you can't, I mean, some of that stuff, what's it all about, Alfie, and all I mean, my God, these are genius songs, but they had the right voice. They may not have been the same song with somebody else singing it. I mean, granted, everybody's cut Backrack David songs, but my point is the fact that that was the voice. Glenn Campbell was the voice for Jimmy Webb. I mean, it was like, and so much so that when I heard a song called "I Have You," not long after we moved here, I was listening to a guy by the name of Gene Nelson, who I've written songs with since, but he sang "I Have You" that Glenn Campbell had done, and I went, "What's he doing a cover song for?" He didn't write that, and it turns out he did write it. But it's just everything that Glenn Campbell sang, you just associated with Jimmy Webb having written it.
Yeah.
So it's
yeah, funny. I don't like the name drop, but man, you reminded me of so many things. I had Leslie Satcher on, and she was talking about Troubadour, and
I love Leslie.
I asked Leslie if she would play a song on the show, because she actually came to my house to record the episode, and she said, "Well, do you want me to do the cover song?" And I was like, "What are you talking about?" She goes, "Troubadour." I was like, "No, that's not a cover song, Leslie. That's your song." But she looked at it like a cover song, and it was her song. I was like, "No, this is not a cover. George Strait is the one that covered that song, not the other way around."
Right. Well, I remember being downtown when I first heard that song, Troubadour, and
man, powerful stuff.
Oh, she's just one of my all-time favorites. I was going to walk over here. I've got a poster. She and I played the Tybee Post Theater together back in 2017, and it was just, I've loved her ever since I first heard her.
Yeah, her and David are phenomenal people. I think my most prized possession is a copy of one of her records. It's a vinyl, and she wrote on it, "To Boston Chris, thank you for being a friend to music." And man, I love it so much. It was like I think one of 100 copies ever made. So like, I treasure that so much.
She was smart. She did vinyl and sold every one that she had. Now me, I didn't. I printed up 2,000 CDs of that song. "Getting Older" was the title track to my last CD. And if you need 10 or 20 of them, let me know. I'll be happy to send them to you, because I think I've still got about 1,990 of them.
I would absolutely love that. I will find good homes for them, Tony. I promise.
Nobody has a CD player anymore.
Oh,
I should have done the market research,
Yeah, it's bad to be ahead of the times instead of behind the times, right?
I'm like I told you, I've still got a typewriter. So
absolutely. So anyway, back on track. We're gonna play a live version, courtesy of Jim Parker, here on the show, of the one and only Tony Arata doing his global smash. By the way, "The Dance." Y'all check it out.
Looking back on the memory of the dance we shared beneath the stars above. And for a moment, all the world was right. How could I have known that you'd ever say goodbye? And now I'm glad I didn't know where it all would end and the way it all would go. Our lives are better left to chance. I could have missed the pain, but I'd have had to miss the dance. Holding you, now I healed everything for a moment. Now wasn't I the king? But if I'd only known how that king would fall, hey, now who's to say? You know I might have changed it all. So now I'm glad I didn't know the way it all would end and the way it all would go. Our lives are better left to chance. I could have missed the pain, but I'd have had to miss the dance. Our lives are better left to chance. I could have missed the pain, but I'd have had to miss the dance.
All right, so welcome back, everybody. We talked about global smashes, and I don't get to talk about this very often because there are very few songs out there that have global impact. But the dance is definitely one of them, and I know you have felt that global impact over the years, hearing people's stories of how this song has impacted their lives and changed the way they are, whether they've used it at a wedding. I know you've heard this over the years, so what is that like as a songwriter to hear the impact that something you created has had on so many people?
Well, well, of course, it's flattering, and it's also very humbling, and I'm glad that it happened early on because it taught me something very, very important. Is that you may well be known for something. You may well be known for a song. So what do you want that to be? I mean, you know, I'm very grateful that the song has meant what it has to so many. My intent was never that. My intent was to write, like I said, I've always said, the best thing you can on any given day. A lot of things happen for that song that if I thought for one fleeting moment that, you know, it was by some grand design. I mean, who wouldn't do that every week? You would do that every week but a lot of things have to line up. So it's, most of all, I'm just grateful for the people I've met and the opportunities I've had, you know, that would have never presented themselves without that song.
I can't imagine you ever get tired of hearing the stories, right, Tony?
No, I don't. And, you know, I'm ever amazed at where those words wind up sometimes. I've been in sport, you know, I told you early in the interview, I said all I ever wanted to do was be a baseball player. Mm-hmm. Well, my neighbor called me and said, "Hey, man, you're in Sports Illustrated again." And I went, "What do you mean?" And Johnny Bench quoted the dance in one of his interviews.
Yeah.
Johnny Bench was my father's my father was from Cincinnati, was a huge Johnny Bench fan. So I had some posters made up with lyrics from the dance, made hat show print. So I called up to Cincinnati, the baseball team, and got with the PR guy and said, I want to get something to Mr. Bench, if you would. And so I wrote a letter about how my father was a Cincinnati kid and loved Johnny Bench like no other. And so I sent the poster up there, and about a week later, my phone rings, and it's Johnny Bench.
Wow.
And we're the longest conversation. And this is where none of this can be planned. It just has to happen. So we're talking, and he knew more about music than I do. He told me, this is hilarious. He told me towards the end of the conversation, he said, well, Tony, he said, it must be great. You always knew what you wanted to do, and you did it. And I said, no, Johnny, I said, all I ever wanted to do was be a baseball player, and you did it. And he said, well, that's weird. He said, all I ever wanted to do was be a songwriter. So you can't plan any of that stuff. It just has to come from a very genuine place. It has to just happen honestly and organically. It can't be fabricated. And
that's just proof right there that success can be measured in many different ways.
Oh, sure. And I mean, I can't tell you. I mean, the list of characters that I've gotten to meet because of that song, it's unreal. I mean, I got to have a conversation with Tony Bennett at the Grammys because of that song. Not because he knew the song per se, but the fact that he was there and had been nominated as well as I had been that year. And but I mean, these are people that you're not going to cross paths with them, but for the serendipitous moments like presented themselves as a result of the dance and some other songs. But I'll always be grateful for it. I truly will be.